All right, everyone, I'd like to welcome Mr. Paul Foos and this person's book, A Short Offhand Killing Affair, Soldiers and Social Conflict During the Mexican-American War, was a book that influenced me greatly during my graduate studies. And I'm honored to have him here to give us a little bit of oversight into the Mexican-American War. So if you don't mind, Mr. Foos, if I could ask you, could you, for the students, would you kind of give a brief overview of the Mexican-American War, as many of them probably have never heard of it?
Yes, thanks for the introduction. And I would be happy to talk about this as an academic. I hope I don't go on rambling forever and ever, and it's hard to say where to start and where to end, as with most history. It's hard to divide things up super neatly, but you can look at the United States and the Republic of Mexico in the first half of the 19th century. The U.S., of course, has been an independent republic since 1776, and Mexico achieved its independence from Spain in 1821, fought its own War of Independence, and became a republic in 1824. And one of the first acts was to abolish the institution of slavery, something the United States didn't manage to do. And this is, clearly, we know the United States was in great controversy over the issue of slavery in 1820s, 1830s. In the 1830s, Americans from the South started to go into a part of Mexico called Tejas, or Texas, and they were welcomed to some extent by the Mexican government. They were part of this expanding cotton empire of the South. They came there to grow cotton. They brought their slaves, and since slavery was illegal in Mexico, they said these are people on 99-year indentures. So a lot of people poured in. Mexico saw that they were sort of becoming too independent from the government, and Texas broke off and fought a war. The Anglos in Texas fought a war with Mexico, 1836, achieved their independence. And very soon they want to turn around and join the United States. So they appeal to the United States. Eventually, President John Tyler, on his last day in office, pushes a resolution through Congress to annex Texas, something that was basically illegal because you're supposed to have a treaty and 2/3 of Congress. So Texas, technically is not really part of the United States. We'll drop that anyways. So this causes great controversy in the United States. Should we annex Texas? Should we extend the area of slavery? Should we, commit this act against a foreign government? Tyler is out. President Polk comes in with a very jingoistic campaign saying, we've got to bring in Texas. We've got to annex Oregon, take Oregon Territory away from Britain, 54-40-year fight, manifest destiny. We're going to take everything we can. Well, in early 1846, the U.S. is moving troops along what they see as the southern border of Texas, which they see as the Rio Grande. Mexico thinks the border is a little farther north. And in this disputed area, American soldiers are ambushed and killed, and President Polk proclaims American blood has been shed on American soil and declares war. They make peace with Britain, settle the Oregon Territory, and start moving troops into Texas and down into Mexico, pushing into northern Mexico. There are some big battles in the north at Monterrey and Buena Vista, led by General Zachary Taylor, future president. Mexico, again, I mentioned they had become a republic, but Mexico had a lot of internal strife, civil war, competition for power, never really had a unified economy, strong economy, government. They're under attack from the European powers. Every time they rack up debts, the Europeans come in and bully them, the U.S. also. So Mexico not very well organized for a fight. They raise Santa Anna. Their president raises big conscript armies, and they fight battles pretty well and pose a pretty strong challenge to the U.S. But these armies often melt away after battles, and Santa Anna's got to do it all over again. In the early part of through 1846, U.S. takes a lot of northern Mexico. President Polk sends Stephen Kearny up the Santa Fe Trail out to California, and a naval expedition under Doniphan also to California. At the same time, the adventurer John C. Fremont, before the war even started, says, I'm going to California, see what we can get going out there. And they launch the so-called Bear Flag Revolts, American settlers out there. So all this is in motion. The U.S. is saying, well, we can't let the British get California. We can't let the Russians come down out of the Northwest. So we're going for it. And in early 1847, the U.S. lands an expeditionary force on the Gulf Coast at Veracruz under Winfield Scott, and they fight from Veracruz up the Valley of Mexico up to Mexico City. Again, hard-fought battles, small U.S. force with artillery, modern weapons of the time, tactics learned from the Napoleonic Wars, concentrated fire. And, Santa Anna knows a lot of this stuff too, but again, some disadvantages there with organization, logistics, supplies, and ultimately the U.S. makes its way to Mexico City, takes Mexico City, occupies it for several months while they hammer out a sort of treaty of cession with the Mexican government. But ultimately, the war ends with Mexico ceding about half its territory, Texas, California, New Mexico, Arizona, large swaths of the American Southwest and West, the U.S. paying something like $15 million or something in compensation. And again, but again, meantime, in the United States, the controversy over should we take more territory, should we take more slave territory, what to do with this land. The controversy is mainly, Americans have complicated feelings about slavery itself, but should we open more land to slavery? That's the big issue. Should there be free soil or slave territory on lands that Northerners fought for? This issue of free soil, this really tears up the political more, as riven with conflict as it was. By 1848, this is being hammered out in Congress, in local, state venues. The former president, John Quincy Adams, drops dead on the floor of the House of Representatives, arguing for a treaty, to have free territory on the areas conquered in the Mexican War. So it gets personal, it gets angry. So.
No, that was wonderful. From a high school perspective, in terms of the students are really only responsible for the new territories that are added, a little bit here and there, but that was a wonderful overview. I appreciate that. I learned a few things in there myself. I appreciate that. One of the things that I enjoyed about your book more than anything was the fact that you get into the racial problems aspects, where this is before the American Civil War, obviously. And so it's leading into, as you've mentioned, slavery a couple of times. But in terms of when we think of racism, sometimes we tend to only think about racism black and white, whereas this is, there's racism towards, Mexican people, Hispanic people, et cetera. So do you have anything that you could possibly share in terms of those aspects? There was so much in the book that was so on point and that drew my interest in, and that I try to share with my students each year. But do you have anything that you could share?
Well, it's a huge question at the time and today. I think I started this looking at the problem of the Mexican-American War in terms of, I'm actually really consider myself to be a labor historian. I was looking at war and society in terms of working people as soldiers. And the questions that were kicking around when I was writing this were, why, why do American workers, why do ordinary people buy into ideas of imperialism and racism, or do they? Why is this? Why is it so? Why is the U.S. so exceptional in, again, its views of race? There's a book came out around the time by David Roediger, The Wages of Whiteness, saying that, well, white workers are paid sort of a wage of they're maybe not, are not that well off materially, economically, but just saying, well, you're white and you can sort of have a higher status than someone who's not. And I don't know, it's a very complicated issue. And I looked at these mostly soldiers going into Mexico, which is a different sort of situation racially, socially, than what they found in the US. And as they're going in there, I mean, a lot of the histories you read are, from the point of view of the politicians and the newspaper editors, these cries of manifest destiny, the white man, must rule all of, North America, or all of this vast territory. And, a lot of times people just accept that at face value. I'm looking at what are real people, what are they experiencing? Are they buying these preconceived notions of superiority, or, and run with it, or do they investigate on their own? Do they find some different things? And I think I found, and it's always hard to make things crystal clear, but I think I found that some people did buy into those racial myths and acted out in violence and in other means of dominance. But some people found different avenues, and found different ways, to relate to real people, Black, white, Hispanic. And again, I showed some of that. I mean, just I just looking back at my book, I mean, one of the craziest things I saw, I just pulled out, was like these volunteers in Cincinnati, Ohio, going in just full of enthusiasm for manifest destiny in the war, and some of them get rejected, like, we've already filled up the regiment. So they go out and riot and tear up the town. They rip up an American flag, and they go and they burn black down frame houses in a Black neighborhood, targeting African Americans. I mean, you just part of, I think, of our American heritage, the heritage of racism, is this vast confusion. And it's, when you have racism mixed with these ethnic issues, where you're saying, well, this is an Anglo-Saxon manifest destiny. Well, many of these people are Irish, German, Catholic, all different sorts of backgrounds. And again, I talk a lot about, again, the divisions in society which come out in the army. The regular army soldier, who's typically an immigrant, treated with harsh discipline. The volunteer soldier, who might be, slack discipline, sees himself as sort of a heroic figure. There's all these gradations. And so what I found when looking for clarity, I found more confusion. There's so many divisions, economic, social, ethnic, racial, that people act out. People, come into the circumstances, and they sort of, as much as they can, make their own way through this confusion.
You explaining that makes me feel better, because don't get me wrong, the exact points you were talking about, the regular army and the volunteers, it's like, some people, when they think of racism, it's like almost there's an agenda that you're on board and everybody feels the same way. But like you just explained, it's all over the place, because there isn't this one agenda. And I was like, wow, this is really, so that's what kind of drew me in, is because I had never heard anything like that. And it was, the words you used, the scenes you described, it was just very vivid and shocking, to be honest.
Yes. Yeah, it is. And let's see. I mean, and certainly many of the people coming in from Texas, areas of the South and Southwest, didn't really change their views of race. I mean, these were people who were used to a rigid slave system. They found, actually, Mexico, African slavery never really worked well in Mexico historically through the 17th, 18th century. And in fact, they had it, but Mexico's economy turned into more of sort of peasant agriculture. And there were many Africans who were free people. They had been freed. They were, just living whatever lives. I don't know. I don't think they had the highest of status in Mexico, but these Texans coming in will say, well, that's an escaped slave. I'm going to capture him and bring him back with me. But, Mexicans reacted differently. They would protect these people and, regarded them in a different light. So it's a sort of a collision of worlds. And, so there's a sort of a rigid system. The South is also the fact that this is a military campaign, and this kind of freelance racism, retribution, and that's really not compatible with a military campaign. And, as you see all these conflicts over issues of race, of people feeling like, because of manifest destiny, I can rob these Black and brown people, I can loot, I can grab, there are these high-flown promises of the golden Jesuses of Mexico that you could just, loot. And, there's now officers saying, no, in an army, everyone's got to be, under discipline. Somebody's out looting. We might flog you. We might shoot you. We might throw you in jail. And this causes, again, the conflict is heightened. Regular army soldiers are kept to barracks. These volunteers are given more free rein. They're out looting in the countryside. They're supposed to be occupying, but they're stirring up guerrilla resistance. The people who are being robbed. I mean, we see this in American wars in, Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam. We see this now. Do you want to be occupiers? Do you want to be freebooters? The two things really don't work. Is idea of, freedom, whatever, consonant with being an occupier.
You just brought up a good point. I was going over some notes, getting ready for the school year and talking about the Vietnam War, the My Lai massacre. And it's like what you just described, it's the same type of thing. And it's like war just brings out the worst in people. I mean, for real. But the other part too is, like I mentioned, I've been using your book in class for quite a while to give examples. And one of the things, just to, you probably are aware of this, but a lot of the students, when we think of racism today in the classroom, most people think it's like black and white. It's not like in general towards other races, although some grasp that concept. But like, for example, when there's this racism towards the Mexican people and some of the specific incidents that, you bring up in the book, using primary sources to document them, that's kind of some of the things I like to use in class. And the kids are blown away. And it's like, wow, it's so I guess the reality is they really weren't aware what white supremacy really, entails in that context. Do you have like a short story or anything that, from that, using some of the sources that other academics don't use? Because that's what I've read about the Mexican-American War before, but your book's the only one that drew me in.
Yeah. Well, I was looking back through my bibliography as I was going back over this. I'm just like, I didn't even remember all these places I had been to, all these archives and historicals, traveling around in my beat up old Escort to North Carolina, New Orleans, Ohio, and everything. And it was fun. I probably couldn't do it today. I'm not as vigorous, but so a lot of, I really dug through diaries and letters, which I guess is sort of the historian's mainstay. But also I was very interested in what was going on in urban centers. So, I looked at Boston, looked at like the Catholic newspaper in Boston, and there was just tremendous controversy there over, just again among urban workers and the Irish laboring classes there. And certainly some of the working men's, at that time there was a working man's party in New York City, and I looked through their publications and sources at, the really intense controversy between, dedicated anti-slavery people with others who had a more imperialist outlook. And again, this gets at what I was looking at, why do working people support these issues, racism, imperialism, or do they? It's clearly more complicated. And so those are some of the sources, just all kinds. Again, the 1840s, the early republic, I'm often envious of how diverse the viewpoints were, the points of view of the press. You have intense radicalism. You have all kinds of utopians, religious nuts and health nuts, and I don't know, it's condescending to call them nuts, but people, free thinkers, and just expressing themselves and willing to speak their mind and stand up and for their beliefs and go out on the stump and speak for them. I mean, there were, you had to have courage to speak out in those days. When even when you went to vote, there was no secret ballot. You went and you held up your red or blue ballot and you put it in the box, and you might have to fight somebody standing around the ballot box. The same way, if you went out and spoke your abolitionist beliefs, you could people were killed. I mean, Cassius Clay, the only abolitionist in the South. I mean, he was shot and stabbed while he was speaking for anti-slavery in Kentucky several times. He kept going. So again, trying to find as many viewpoints as I could, with avoiding the trap of accepting newspaper editors' opinions as what real people were thinking. And that's why I tried to find diaries. There's a lot of military reports, official reports, which have testimony. Particularly interesting were the court marshals of the San Patricio Battalion, the people who deserted and joined the Mexican side. I mean, you get a lot of these mainly working class people, why they did it, what they were looking for. Again, with military service is another form of labor. Many of these people were serial deserters. They'd leave the U.S., join the Mexican army for a better deal, leave the Mexican army, look for work, go up to California looking for gold. So people made choices. People did different things. And one of the most fascinating sources were these two brothers, John Hodge and Alfred Hodge, who were, poor orphans, were adopted and sent out to work at an earlier age as printers' apprentices, and both joined up Mexican War when it broke out. John Hodge was in the army, regular army, which was not very elite status, went to Mexico. Alfred Hodge was in the Navy and ended up sailing out to California. And it's great. You rarely get this dialogue. John Hodge ended up becoming embittered and sort of anti-army. He hated the way the army treated people and the way he treated Mexicans. And he ends up becoming a free soiler, espousing sort of, anti-expansionist views. And Alfred Hodge went to California and was, rabid, very kind of ugly, pro-slavery, pro-imperialism, although he becomes kind of disgusted with what he sees in California, the kind of the greed and the individualistic, every man for himself. So just that sort of thing there's nowhere near as many sources for the Mexican War as you see for, say, the Civil War, with just the rafts and volumes of letters that probably no one has ever even gone through yet. So that was...
Well, I can say the letters, the diaries, the firsthand accounts, that's what always makes the biggest impression with the students. When you again, you're reading what someone is thinking from that time period. And that's hard to, comprehend sometimes, that people thought a certain way. I'm not, nothing in particular, but, it always makes this, interesting impression with the students when they're reading this firsthand encounters and the way they're thinking, et cetera. So that was a part that I enjoyed about your book a great deal. The last question I really had, was there anything additional that you felt like that we didn't talk about that you thought was important, that you think, high school kids or freshmen in college, that they might find interesting? Because again, hearing that you did a lot of this research driving from place to place, that's amazing, because today with the internet, you don't really have to do that as much. So that's kind of cool to me. But is there anything else you'd like to share?
Well, a lot of these sources aren't on the internet even now, so you may end up in an archive anyways. And I know a lot aren't, but maybe more and more are. But yeah,
that's a great point. I didn't consider that,
yeah.
because again, that's why I think your book is so good, is because you're using sources that are just not out there. So yeah, thank you for that correction.
And again, I haven't checked whether, again, the archive, this stuff is so fragile, and archives are underfunded, and they've, so maybe it isn't, maybe it isn't. And sometimes the best stuff is the stuff that no one's gotten around to digitizing yet, which is where you'll make the discoveries that maybe nobody else has as well. But
well, I haven't written a book, but I can say, my capstone for my master's was on the lost cause, and I literally did have to physically buy some of the textbooks that were in Virginia schools in order to show, because they're not online. Like, I guess they don't want to put them online because they're so controversial, but I did have to buy 3 or 4 older textbooks. So I totally forgot about that.
Yeah. I would find old books in the Yale library down on a bottom shelf, and they had an old card catalog that was handwritten. You find these cards that are handwritten, and you open up the book, it hasn't been opened in 80 years or something. You've hit something really great. But anyway, so yeah, just kind of went over a lot of this, but
no, this has been wonderful. I can't thank you enough, and I don't want to hold you up any longer than need be. I'm totally pleased. Like, I'm excited to again, Mexican American War is so underappreciated in terms of, this is one topic that most students have never even heard of.
Yeah. Well, it's just at times I never wanted to be like a war historian or a military historian. Again, I see myself as a social historian looking at labor and social forces. So it's just, the early republic is just still fascinating to me, and I'm still trying to come up with some more projects to write. Even though I'm not a working historian, I don't teach anymore, I still have some writing projects. And it's something to look at this, the sort of, the small scale, the Republican nature of that, the controversies, how out in the open it was, how face to face it was. I think that teaches us something. It's different, and there's sort of the cliche in history as well. Let's learn the lessons of the past, see how we live today. Well, some of those lessons don't apply. It was so different and odd that the lesson is, think differently. Learn how maybe society was different. How again, the lesson is maybe we've got to change the way we approach each other and think about a different type of politics and social relations. And maybe that's the lesson. Not that history will repeat itself, but we've got to break out our ways of thinking. And also, again, just traveling around this country, the echoes. I mean, being in New Orleans and looking at stuff down there, and people would say, well, there's not a lot of that left. I guess it all burned up during the Civil War or something, but you just find that this is just not a record keeping culture, you know, and you do find records in, say, New Orleans, and it's some Yankee merchant from, you know, Connecticut or something who's keeping track of the weather and every dollar he pushes across his counting table. And then I traveled around. I followed the path of Scott's army from Veracruz up through Jalapa and up to Mexico City, visiting all those sites. I didn't really get to do a lot of archival stuff in Mexico, but just seeing the places and experiencing that, learning, improving my Spanish, that was important. And again, I doing U.S. history, I think that's I don't know, that's I think people are realizing it's become less of a thing, that you always got to take an international approach. The US is just too small a lens to view history, and increasingly to view the US itself. So that was an important part. And I think that, certainly people today doing US history have got to look a little more broadly. And so anyways.
Oh, thank you so much. I can't stress how much this is going to help. Students are going to love this. And again, hopefully maybe a couple of them might buy your book, and contribute there. But like I said, I reread a lot of the highlighted parts where I've made annotations, each summer before I get into and it's really helped me a great deal. So you really inspired me to be interested in something that I previously was not.
Yeah. Well, it makes me very happy to have interest and to get good feedback on that, and something that's, just, again, it makes me want to work on my other writing projects, which are often get dusty as I do other things. But
I'll be looking forward to if you put something else out, definitely.
Yeah.
So.
All right, Chad. Well, thanks for doing this.